As of now, inside our Open API specification, we have described 4 APIs. So using these 4 APIs, any consumer, they can consume these APIs and they can display the categories and product details in their websites. So now think of a scenario, one of the end user who is using my consumer website, they liked one of the product, maybe they liked one of the mobile that my consumer is displaying with the data from the EG shop. And now my end user decided to buy that product by placing an order. So in order to support this new scenario, I want to introduce new API with the name orders, which will support HTTP post, because my consumers, they want to place a new order, which means it has to create some new data inside the EG shop. So whenever we are trying to create new records, we have to use the HTTP post. Whereas whenever we are trying to display or get the existing data, we just have to use the HTTP get. So this is the standard that we need to follow. So now inside this lecture, let's try to build this new API. So for the same, what I can do is I can scroll this entire UI thing to right hand side so that we'll have lot space on the editor. And next thing what I can do is I can close all these paths that we have so that we'll get some space here. And I can also close this info object, servers object. So now what I can do is I can just start a new path. So whenever we want to describe a new path inside our paths, we have to start with a forward slash followed by what is the path name. So the path name is orders. So after mentioning the path name, I'm going to give a colon and press enter and give tab space. Like we're discussing, the HTTP method that it is going to support here is post. So let's give the same like post here, then press enter and give tab space. And once we give this information, we have to provide the summary and description of our API. So I'm going to mention the same here. So like you can see here, the summary is create order and the description is post order details to EG shop for processing and shipping. So that's a description. And once we mention this summary and description, since this is an HTTP post API, obviously we have to send the data inside the request. So here the parameters are not supported because this is an HTTP post. So we can ignore the parameter section and we can start a new section related to request body. So here we have to give request body just in the same position where we have summary description. So once we give this request body, press enter and give a space. And after this, we have to mention the content since we are going to describe the content of our request. So once we mention this content, we need to mention what is the type of our content. Since we are going to send the request in a JSON format, I have mentioned the application/JSON just below the content. Next, just like how we do for response, the same we need to follow. We have to mention the schema. And since we want to explain our request object, we need to mention what is the type of our request. So the type I want to have it as an object. So the request structure, how we can have it here is, it is an object and it can contains list of products and the address details. So it's quite possible, right? Inside an object, we can have another array of objects and another objects. So I want to follow the same structure. So my overall schema data type is an object. And since I'm using object, I have to define the properties as well. Like I need to mention these properties. And the very first property that I want to have here is products. So this is the property name with the name products. And these products, the type is array. Because like I said, in an order, we can have any number of products that an end user can order. Like he can order a mobile, he can order a laptop, he can order an headphone. So that's why we want to allow multiple products inside the request body. So due to that reason, for the properties products, I have mentioned the type as an array. And since here we have defined array, after array definitely we have to mention the items and we need to describe what is the type of each item. Like we have a products array, like what we are going to hold inside this products array. Is it list of strings? Is it list of objects? So we have to define that. So that's why immediately after items, we need to mention the type of each item. So the type of each item is object. So here, since we have mentioned the type as an object, we definitely have to mention that object properties. That's why we need to use these properties. And the very first property that I want to define here is product ID. So this will have the product ID details. So the product ID has to be an integer. That's why I will mention this type as an integer. So let me mention type as an integer here. So the next property that we can have here is name. So the type is again string here. After the name, we have the price, and the type of the price is number since we want to allow the decimal value. And after price, we have category name. So the category name property type is again string. So we have to mention the same here. And at last we have quantity. So the meaning of quantity here is that my end user can buy 2 mobiles of same product or 2 laptops of same product. So this quantity indicates the quantity of the products inside the order. So that's why we need to make sure we have to mention this type as an integer, and we have used the same quantity inside the other APIs also, but in those APIs the quantity represents the overall stock of the product. Like maybe in simple language I can say that whenever my Easy Shop is returning the data, and inside the data if you have quantity, it represents the overall stock. Whereas if my consumers, whenever they are trying to consume the APIs and if they are sending a quantity inside the request, that represents the overall quantity of the product inside an order. So now we have successfully defined our array object schema structure. Like under our overall schema object, we have an products array, which again consists of an objects with all this data. So along with the products array, I also want to accept the address details. So that's why we need to come to the same position where products is there. And here I am going to start a new property with the name address. And the type of this address property has to be object. So now since it is an object, I again have to explain the properties of this object. So the properties that I'm going to have here is, so these are the properties that I want to have, like address line 1 is one of the property which is of type string, and post that we can have city, state, zip code. So these are all the properties present inside this address object. So with this, we successfully represented our request body schema structure. But here we are getting an error because after this type and array, I have not given any space. So we have to give space, which is very important. So please make sure all your keys are showing in this color and all your values are showing in the white color. So inside the YAML syntax, after every key, you have to give this space value if you are mentioning the value inside the same line. So you can see if I remove this space, the whole line is becoming invalid. So that's why please make sure you are mentioning that space. So with this, we have successfully created the request body and its schema structure. And when we are done with this, I'm going to show you how this structure is going to look like. Then it will make more sense to you. Now you can see we are getting an error saying that responses are missing. We have provided the request body, but where is the responses? So let's try to provide the same. So for the same, I have closed the request body and post that here we can provide responses to start describing the responses schema structure. So here the status code that I want to use is 201. So whenever we are using HTTP post, as per the standards, we have to return the 201. So 201 indicates the given resource or the given request data is successfully created on the backend. So that's what 201 indicates. So that's why I need to give this 201 here as a code. And after this, I'm going to mention the description using the description here. And once we provide the description, we can describe the content of this response, which belongs to the 201 code. So inside the content, again, I have to mention application/JSON. Since our response is going to be in JSON format, I have to mention this. And after this, we have to mention schema to describe the schema of our response object. So as soon as we mention schema, we have to mention the type. So the type I want to have it here is object. And since we are using object, definitely we have to explain the properties of the object. So that's why I have mentioned this properties field here. Post that, I am pressing an enter, and here we can mention the property details. Like the very first property that I want to have here is order ID, and the type is integer. So I want to have only this value inside my response. So the purpose of this order ID is whenever the order creation is successfully processed in the backend of each shop, it is going to return an order ID to my consumers, so that the same order ID they can display to the end users, and my consumers also they can store this order ID for their future reference. So with this, we have successfully created a new API that supports HTTP post. So if you try to expand everything, so this is very simple and easy. Like we have to mention the API path, and after the API path, you just have to mention this post followed by summary, description. And since for post, the request is mandatory, you have to mention this request body. And similarly, we have to mention the responses. So here you can observe the details that we write after content is similar inside request body and responses. So we'll just mention what is the media type of our content, post that schema, and we'll try to explain it. So here we also follow the same, like content, what is the media type of our content, schema, and we're trying to explain the schema structure. So now let's try to understand how this is looking like inside our Swagger UI. So for the same, I'm going to drag this to left hand side. So now you can see there is a new post orders came into picture. If I click on this, you will see there will be no parameters, but request body came into picture, which is of type application/JSON. And you can see this is how our request schema is going to look like. Like it is of type object, and inside that object we have a products property which is of type array. So that's why you can see square bracket here. And inside this array, every item is an product object which holds product ID, name, price, category name, quantity. And after this products array, we have another object which is of type address, and it has address line 1, city, state, zip code. So as of now, you can see all the example values it is showing based upon the default values. Like for string it will show string, for integers and numbers it will show 0. So the same structure you can also try to understand here under schema. Like we have an object which has products of type array, so you can confirm the same by looking at these square brackets, which confirms it's an array. And we have the last object which is of type address, and it has all these properties. And if you expand these products, it's an array. That's why all these object details are surrounded by these square brackets. So now if you go to the responses, you can see for 201 the media type is application/JSON, which we have defined, and this is how they are going to get a response. They'll just get an order ID which is of type integer, and you can confirm the same inside the schema. So here you can also click on this try it out option. So you can see the request body is populated automatically based upon the example data. If needed, you can change all these values and you can click on this execute, but definitely you're going to get an error. But if you see, this is how the curl request is going to look like, and this is the request URL where the request has been sent. And the response, obviously it is an error response because the server URL is not valid. So I'm clicking on this clear again, and we can click on this cancel to go to the normal Swagger UI. So this way we have successfully described an HTTP POST API with the help of OpenAPI specification. The only new thing that we learn here is request body, how to pass the data in the request body. So that's a newly thing that we have learned. So the same request body we have to follow for put operation or update operation. So whenever you are into situations where you have to explain an request body of an API, please use this request body followed by this structure that we have discussed. So with this, I'm assuming you're super clear. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye.